Something inside Radu's chest was clawing its way up through his throat, and it had teeth. The chains came first. Violet light, looped twice around his wrists and once across his collarbone, and where they touched him, the cold went straight to the marrow, the way iron does in January when your fingers stick to it. They dragged him down onto the broken temple stone. His knees hit. The skin split. He felt none of that, because all of his attention had gone to the thing pushing up under his sternum. The second heartbeat that was not his, beating now in a panic, beating like it had finally understood the door was open. It tore loose through his mouth. Blue fire. A muzzle, then the long line of a skull. Then the shoulders of something that had been folded into the space behind his ribs for longer than he could measure, coming out all at once. And the sound it made was his own voice and not his own voice, both of them screaming on the same breath. His ribs spread. He heard them go, a wet popping along both sides, the way green wood gives when you bend it past where it wants to bend. A woman was scrambling toward him over the rubble. Her boots slid on loose stone and she went to one knee and came up again without slowing, both hands out in front of her, and between her fingers there was a knot of the same violet light, the last of it, burning down to nothing. "Hold," she said. "Hold, you stubborn, you hold." Her hands closed on the knot. The thread snapped, and the dark came down over all of it before anyone could see what stood up. 20 years the valley had called him empty, and on most days he believed them. Radu went up the north slope before light with 2 hairs already stiff at his belt, and a third snare to clear, breaking trail through snow that came past his knees in the drifts, and not at all where the wind had scoured the rock bare. The cold worked at him through the seams of his coat. His breath froze in the stubble around his mouth. Somewhere below and behind him, a dog was barking at the dark, one of the village dogs, and he kept well off the path that the bark marked, because a man clearing other men's trap lines learns early to stay out of the places where dogs have opinions. He stopped to free the third snare and found it sprung and empty. The wire kinked, fur caught in it, but no animal. Fox, maybe. He worked the wire straight with fingers that had stopped feeling much an hour ago and reset it under the deadfall. At his throat, on a cord gone black with grease and weather, hung a charm of wolf iron. It was a finger of cold metal, hammered flat, stamped with the old mark that the valley nailed over its doorways and its cradles to keep the wolf-blooded out. Every house in the valley had one. Theirs hung facing the road to turn the beast away. Radu wore his facing his own skin, because the men who put it on him 20 years back had not meant it to protect him. They had meant it to mark him. Prey wears the sign of prey, so the hunt knows which throat to go for, and the day they decided he was the one Valkan a man could run down without sin, they hung the iron on him themselves and watched to see if it burned. It had not. Empty things do not burn. The wolf roads were nearly gone by then. Old tracks the wolf houses cut through these mountains when they still ruled them, marked at the trailheads with cairns and notched posts, so a walker in the dark would know the way was open and the next stretch would hold his weight. Those who still meant to walk such a road to its end kept the old custom, a mark left at the head of the trail for whoever came behind, and a light burning through the long, blind stretches so no one walking after lost the path. If you mean to follow this one with him all the way down into the dark of it, Leave your mark at the trailhead now and keep your light lit, the way the old walkers did, so the road stays open and word reaches you the moment it moves again. He had just gotten the wire seated when the brush below him exploded. The boar came uphill at him out of a hollow he had not checked, and it came fast, faster than a thing that size had any right to move through snow. A black wall of muscle and stink with two yellow tusks curving up out of the bottom of its face. Radu got the knife half out. That was all the time he had. The boar hit him across the thighs, and the world tipped, and the white ground came up and slammed the breath out of him. It was on him before he stopped sliding. He got his left forearm into its mouth to keep the tusks off his belly, and the lower tusk went through the meat of his arm and out the other side, and he felt that. He felt every bit of that. A line of fire from wrist to elbow, and the grind of the tusk against the bone. His right hand was still on the knife. He drove it up under the foreleg once, twice, blind, the blade skating off rib and then sinking. And the animal screamed and wrenched its head, and the tusk tore back out of his arm, taking a strip of him with it. Hot blood, his own, ran down into the snow and steamed. He stabbed it again, lower, and this time the knife found the soft place behind the shoulder and stayed, and the boar bucked and threw him off and stood swaying with the haft jutting from its side. And Radu lay on his back in the red snow with no weapon and no breath, and watched it decide whether to finish him. It did not. It turned, heavy, and crashed back down into the hollow it had come from, and the brush swallowed it, and the only sounds left were his own wet breathing, and the small ticking of snow falling off a branch the animal had hit. Radu rolled onto his hip. His left arm would not close. The hand hung off the end of it and did what he told it to do about half the time, and the rest of the time it just hung there, leaking into his sleeve. He looked at the ruin of it the way you look at a tool that has broken in a way you cannot fix in the field. Then he got his knees under him. He had knelt like this once before, in the long hall with the whole house watching. 16 years old. The fire pit between him and the high seat, and his Uncle Costin standing where his dead father should have stood, and the old healer with her hands painted in ash, and every Valkan who could walk pressed back against the walls to see the air take his wolf. They had done it for 900 years, they told him. Every man of the blood knelt at the fire on the night his 16th winter turned, and the beast rose in him the way heat rises off a stone, and the house saw it. And from that night the boy was a man, and the wolf was his, and no one ever questioned again that he belonged. Radu had knelt. He had shut his eyes and waited for the heat. Nothing came. He had waited past the point where waiting was dignified. He had waited while the fire burned down, and the room got quiet in a way that had texture to it, a quiet you could feel against your skin. And still he knelt with his eyes shut and reached down into himself for the thing that was supposed to be there, and his hand closed on nothing, on a smooth, cold absence, where every other man of his blood carried a furnace. When he finally opened his eyes, the first face he found was Costin's, and Costin, who had taught him to ride and to read and to take a blade off a bigger boy, looked at him for one long moment and then looked away, down at the dead fire, the way you look away from a thing you have decided not to see anymore. By spring, they had walked him to the valley mouth and told him not to come back up. Now, 20 years on, he got one boot under himself in the bloodied snow, and then the other. And he pointed himself at the thread of wood smoke rising off the village below, and he started down. Not because he wanted those people, because the arm would kill him by dark if no one closed it. And the only hands in the valley that closed wounds without first asking whose blood was leaking belonged to the healer at the edge of the trees. He did not remember most of the walk. He remembered falling twice. Then he remembered the iron charm swinging out from his chest each time he pitched forward and swinging back to knock against his breastbone, cold when he caught himself. He remembered a child seeing him at the first fence and running, and a dog that did not bark at him but backed away with its hackles up and its tail clamped, which dogs had always done, which he had stopped wondering about years ago. Then there was a low door and warmth and a smell of tallow and crushed green things, and the floor came up at him, and someone caught his weight before it landed. He woke on his back on a scrubbed plank table, with his coat cut off him, and his ruined arm laid out straight and packed in something that stung. A woman was bent over it, young enough, older than the village wives looked by 40. With her sleeves shoved past the elbow and her forearms strong and her hair tied back hard off a face that did not waste anything. She had a curved needle in her fingers and a length of waxed gut, and she was sewing the long wound shut in small, even pulls. Not gentle, not cruel, the way you mend a thing that has to hold. "You'll keep the arm," she said, not looking up. "If the rot stays out, you came in cold, which helped you. Lie still. I can pay. You can lie still." She tied off, bit the gut, started the next pull. 3 hairs at your belt and not one of them off your own land, so don't tell me what you can pay. He shut his mouth. She worked. A clay lamp on the wall threw her shadow, huge across the rafters, and the shadow's hands moved when her hands moved. And outside the wind found a gap somewhere and made the lamp gutter and the whole room breathe. When the arm was closed, she felt down both his sides with the flats of her thumbs, pressing, and where 2 of his ribs had gone under the bore, she found them, and he came up off the table, and she put a hand flat on his chest and held him down without effort, which surprised him, the strength in it. "Cracked, not through," she said. "I'll wrap them. Breathe out for me." He breathed out. Her hand was over his sternum, just resting there, waiting for the breath to finish so she could feel the bones move, and she went still. Not the stillness of a person concentrating. Something else. Her thumb pressed in over the center of his chest and stopped, and her head tilted, the way a person tilts their head toward a sound at the edge of hearing. And her eyes lost their focus on the room and turned inward, following whatever her hand had found. "Be quiet," she said, very low, although he had said nothing. He felt it then, too, because she had gone looking and woken it. Under his own heartbeat, slow and far down, a second beat. He had carried it his whole life and never once felt it. The way you never feel the floor until it shifts. It was deep in him, and it was slow, and it had a weight to it that was not the weight of a man. And as her hand pressed, it stirred, just barely, like a large animal turning over in a small space and finding the space too small. The woman lifted both hands off his chest and sat back so fast the stool scraped. She was looking at him now, full on, and the color had gone out from under her skin, and her painted forearms had a tremor in them she could not stop. "Who are you?" she said. It did not come out as a question. "Nobody. a poacher. The valley calls me empty." "The valley," she said, "is a fool." Her voice had dropped to almost nothing, and it shook on the last word. She wiped her palms down her apron once, hard, as though she could wipe off what she had touched. "I have set bones since I was 9. I have laid hands on every kind of broken thing that walks into this room, and on the dead, and on women in their last hour, and I know the feel of a man with nothing in him, and you are not him." She leaned in over the table. "There is a wolf in you. It is alive, and it is chained." The lamp guttered. The shadow on the rafters stretched and shrank. Radu lay on the table with his sewn arm and his wrapped ribs and 20 years of being hollow coming apart under him like ice over moving water, and he found he could push only one word up through his teeth. Chained by whom? She did not answer him. Mara set down the curved needle, very carefully, the way you set down a thing when your hands have stopped being reliable. She crossed the room to the hearth and knelt on the swept stone and worked her fingers along the second course of flags from the wall, counting until she found the one that rocked. Then she lifted it out. Radu turned his head on the table to watch. Moving his head was most of what he could do. Under the stone was a hollow lined with a scrap of oiled hide, and in the hollow sat a tin that had once held something else, a trader's tin gone soft at the corners with rust. She brought it back to the lamp and pried the lid with her thumbnail and tipped the contents into her lap. Dried things, a twist of gray hair bound in red thread, a tooth, and a cord of pale leather knotted along its length in a pattern, knot after knot, each a little different from the one before it, the whole thing as long as her forearm. "My grandmother kept the binding work," Mara said. Her voice had gone flat and level, which Radu would learn was the sound she made when something had frightened her, past the place where fear shows. "Every healer keeps a record. We do not write it down, the church reads. We tie it, a knot for a working, the shape of the knot for the working shape. You can read a woman's whole life off a cord like this, if you know the hand." She turned the cord through her fingers, slow reading. "Then that one closed a milk fever," she said, not to him. "That one drew a barb out of a man's eye. That one I do not know. She tied it before I was born." Her thumb stopped on a fat, ugly knot near the middle of the cord. A knot doubled and then doubled again and bound off with a turn she clearly had not expected to find there. She went still in the same way she had gone still over his chest. "Mara, be quiet." She brought the cord to the lamp and turned it in the light and pressed her own nail into the fat knot to feel the way it had been tied, the order of the loops, the count. Her mouth moved. She was tying it again in the air with her free hand, copying it, finding the shape, and the shape she found put the color out of her face for the second time that night. "I tie this knot," she said. "This is my hand. This is the way Petran women have closed a working for 4 generations, the double and the double and the lock. My grandmother taught it to me at this table." She lowered the cord into her lap and looked at the wall above his head and not at him. "And it is tied into a binding I have never worked in my life, on a man your age, from before I could walk." Radu lay still under the wrapped ribs and let that arrange itself. "Your grandmother," he said. "Voika." The name came out of her like something she had to push. "Baba Voika. She set bone in this valley 60 years. She birthed half the graveyard and laid out the other half. There was not a door from the river to the high pasture that did not open to her. Mara closed her hand around the cord. Gee, she was the one good thing I came from. And she chained me. This is her hand on a binding. Mara's jaw worked. I will not lie to a man bleeding on my table. Whatever sits in your chest in irons, the irons are my grandmother's knots. The lamp guttered. Wind found the gap in the wall, and the flame leaned, and the gray hair in Mara's lap stirred as though it had been breathed on. Radu found that the old, smooth, cold place inside him, the hollow he had carried for 20 years, and learned to live around the way a man learns to live around a missing hand, was not a hollow at all. It was a door, and the door had a lock, and the woman whose people had cut the key was sitting an arm's length from him with the key in her lap, weeping without any sound, her shoulders square and her face wet, and her hands not shaking now but perfectly, terribly still. "Take me to where it was done," he said. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand once, and the ash paint there smeared gray across her cheekbone. "You can't stand." "Tomorrow I can stand." "Tomorrow," she said, "they will already be looking for you." Up the valley, in a hall that still had glass in half its windows, Kostin Valkan was breaking the seal on a letter for the tax office at Brasov, when the boy came to tell him his nephew was alive. The boy was a stable hand, 10 or 11, sent up because no one older wanted to be the one to say it. He stood inside the door with his cap crushed in both fists and his eyes on the floor, and he got it out in a rush, the way you spit something hot. The poacher off the north slope, the one they called empty. Where he had come down gored, and the healer at the tree line had taken him in, and a woman who carried water there said the healer had put her hands on his chest and gone white and shut the door, and that was 3 days gone, and the man was still under her roof. Kostin did not put down the letter. He finished reading it. He set it flat on the table and squared its edge to the table's edge with one finger. And then he squared the second letter to the first and the third to the second, until the small stack of the Empire's demands sat true. The fire spat. He still did not speak, and the silence ran on long enough that the boy looked up to see if he had been heard. When Kostin did move, it was to lift one hand and lay it flat against the front of his own coat, over the breastbone, and the way a man checks for a thing he is afraid he has lost from an inner pocket. He held it there a moment. Then he took it away. "His arm," Kostin said. "Was it the right or the left?" The boy did not know. "No," Kostin said. "Of course you don't." He stood. He was a wide man gone soft at the middle, but he still moved like the soldier he had been, no waste in it, and he crossed to the window and looked down the valley at the smoke off the village, and at the smaller single thread of smoke off the healer's roof at the trees. "Tell Andrei to come up, not the others. Andrei." The boy fled. Kostin stayed at the window with his hands loose at his sides and watched the two smokes climb and lean together in the wind. And after a while he reached up again and pressed his palm flat to his own chest and stood like that, listening, the way a man listens at a door he is not sure he wants opened. In the village square, 2 days before the first snow that would not melt, Father Angel was selling salvation by the handful off a trestle table, and the line for it ran past the well. He had a basket of wolf iron at his elbow, fresh from the smith, each charm stamped with the old turning mark that the church had decided long ago it was easier to bless than to forbid. He took each one up, breathed a Latin word over it, dipped his thumb in oil and crossed it, and pressed it into whatever hand was open. For the iron he asked only what a soul could give, a measure of meal, a jar of honey. From the Stoica boy whose father was 3 days dead of the fever, and whose mother was 2 days into it, he took a live hen. Because the boy had nothing else, and because a charm given for nothing was a charm no one valued. "Nail it over the sick-room door," Angel told the boy, not unkindly, folding the hen under his arm by its legs, facing out. The old blood cannot cross cold iron blessed. The boy carried the charm home and nailed it where he was told, over the door behind which his mother was drowning in her own chest, and the fever did not read the mark, and by the week's end the iron hung over an empty room. Angel did not see that part. Angel was working the line, and the line was working him back, because a crowd that has buried 6 in a fortnight wants a thing it can do with its hands, and he was giving them one. He raised his voice over the well only once, when a woman near the back asked, too loud, whether the healer at the trees might not have a tea for the fever, the way she had a tea for everything. "The healer at the trees," Father Angel said, and the line went quiet to hear it, "keeps a man under her roof that this valley cast out by right and by right. A man with no soul in him that the old families themselves marked as beast fodder and turned out. And she has taken him in and laid her hands on him and shut her door. He let a charm swing from his fingers. Ask yourselves what a woman wants with a soulless man behind a shut door. Then ask whose tea you'll be drinking." The crowd made a low sound, the kind a crowd makes before it has decided anything, the kind that can still go either way and is looking for the thing that will tip it. A man at the front held up his hen-bought iron and asked the priest to bless it twice. Oh, the wolf temple stood above the high pasture where the trees gave out, and it had been falling down for longer than the empire had owned the mountains. Radu climbed to it on the 4th day with his arm in a sling. Mara had nodded, and his ribs strapped so tight he breathed in shallow sips, and Mara climbed ahead of him with the tin in a sack across her back and a staff she did not need cutting the snow in front of her boots. Neither of them took the cart road. They went up through the trees on a track only the deer used now. And twice Mara stopped and crouched and put her bare hand flat on the snow and waited listening before she let them go on. The temple was 3 walls and most of an arch, and a floor of broken flags with grass froze stiff between them. Snow had drifted into the corners. At the center, on where the roof would have closed over, a low stone stood, flat-topped, dark with something older than weather, and around its base the flags were not broken but lifted, tilted up and out in a ring, the way ground heaves where a great root has grown under it and died. Mara stopped at the edge of the ring and would not step into it. "This is where," Radu said. It was not a question. He'd been carried here once. He understood now, before he had a memory to put it in. His body knew it. The thing in his chest knew it. It had begun to turn over the moment they came through the trees, slow and heavy, pressing up under the strapping until each shallow breath had a second weight inside it. She wrote it on the cord. Mara knelt and opened the sack and drew out the knotted leather and ran it through her fingers to the fat doubled knot. then passed it to 3 small, tight knots she had not understood in the lamplight and understood now, here, with the stone in front of her. 3 deaths. She tied 3 deaths against this working. Her thumb stopped on each. Not deaths she caused, deaths she stopped. A healer ties what a working cost her. This cost her 3 lives she had to let go to spend the strength on 1. Whose life did she spend it on? Yours. Mara looked up at him. She bound a child. The knot is sized for a wrist no bigger than my thumb. She turned the cord. There is one more, after the deaths. The lock. Radu came forward to the edge of the ring. What does the lock say? Mara read it with her fingertip, the loops and the count and the final turn, and she read it twice before she would say it. And when she said it, her flat, frightened voice had gone almost gentle, which was worse. It says she did it against her own judgment, on another's word to keep the child from a knife. Mara lowered the cord. Costin came to her. He meant to put you in the ground. An heir with the blood is a danger to a regent, and you were the only thing between him and the seat. She talked him out of the knife. She told him a beast child dead is a martyr, and a beast child empty is only a shame, and a shame you can exile and forget. Her jaw set. She caged your wolf so he would let you live. The chains are the reason you have a life to be angry about. The wind came across the broken floor and lifted the snow off the flat stone in a thin sheet and set it down again. Radu stood at the edge of the ring and did not speak for a long time. So somewhere below them in the white, a raven said one harsh thing and stopped. The weight in his chest turned again, and this time it pushed up hard enough that he had to put his good hand against the standing wall and lean. He told me something, Radu said, the day they walked me to the valley mouth. I have carried it 20 years and thought it was contempt. He breathed in his shallow sips. He put his hand on my shoulder at the gate in front of all of them, and he leaned down, and he said low, so only I would hear, "You should thank me, boy." I thought he meant for not having me whipped out. He meant this, Radu. He kept me breathing so he could spend my whole life telling me I was nothing. The words came out without heat, which was its own kind of heat. Your grandmother gave me the cage to save my neck, and he took the cage and made it a leash and walked me on it for 20 years, and I thanked him for the leash because I thought the leash was the kindness. Mara got to her feet. If I undo this, she said, and she made herself say all of it. I do not know what stands up. It has been folded into you since before you could speak. 20 years of it, and it has not been sleeping, it has been waiting, and a thing that waits that long does not come out grateful. It may tear you apart on the way out. It may come out and not know you. I have unbound smaller things and lost the body they were in. She held the cord up between them in her cut fingers, the waxed leather having bitten her palm somewhere on the climb without her noticing. A dark line of blood dried into the lifeline of her hand. And it is my grandmother's lock. If I open it, I open the one good thing I came from and find the knife inside it. Test it, Radu said. No. Test one knot. I have to know it's real. I have spent 20 years being a hollow man. Let me feel the thing in me move while I'm still the one telling it to. Mara held his eyes. Then she stepped into the ring, which she had not been willing to do, and she put her bleeding hand flat on his chest over the strapping, in the same place she had touched on the table. And with the other hand she found the first small knot at the cord's near end. the outermost loop of the working, and she worked it loose with her thumbnail. The leather gave. Under Radu's skin, the blue light came up. It ran out from the center of his chest along the lines of him, the way frost runs across a black window, fast, branching, lighting him from the inside so that for one breath Mara could see the bones of his hand through his hand. The weight in his chest stopped turning and surged, all of it at once up against the strapping and the cracked ribs and the inside of his throat. And Radu's head went back, and a sound came out of him that did not use his voice, a low note that started under the floor and came up through the soles of their boots. And when his eyes opened, they were lit from behind with the same cold blue, and they did not find Mara. They found the standing stone, and the thing looking out of them knew exactly where it was and exactly how long it had been kept there. Mara did not pull her hand away. She pressed it down, hard, and put her face close to his and said his name, his real one, twice. And on the second time the blue guttered and ran back into him and went out, and Radu sagged against the wall with sweat freezing in his hair and his own gray eyes back in his head, and one new white streak run through the black over his left temple, where there had been none that morning. They were both breathing in the small, frightened way now. "That was one knot," Mara said, "the outermost. There are 40. Radu pushed himself off the wall. He stood in the ring on the heaved flags over the place where he had been carried as an infant, and cut from himself to keep from being killed. And he looked at the dark, flat stone, and the white streak in his hair caught the low light. "Take it off," he said, "all of it. Every knot. And I would rather be torn apart at dawn as the truth than live one more winter as his lie." Mara stood in the ring with her grandmother's cord wound through her cut and bleeding fingers, 40 knots of her own blood's work waiting under her thumb, and she closed her hand around it until the leather bit deeper, and she nodded. The knife went into her own palm before it went near him. Dawn had not cleared the ridge yet, and the light in the ruin was the color of old pewter, and Mara knelt in the heaved ring of flags with the cord wound twice around her left hand and her right hand holding the small blade she used for lancing. She drew it across the meat below her thumb without ceremony. Blood welled and ran down into the cup of her palm, and she turned the hand and let it fall onto the first knot, the one nearest the lock, near where the cord lay against the dark standing stone. The blood hit the cast iron of the working and hissed. A thin smoke came up off it, white, and it smelled like a struck flint, and under that, like something older and wetter, like a thawed grave. Radu knelt across the stone from her with his strapped ribs and his slung arm freed now and hanging useless at his side, and his jaw was shaking. Not from the cold, though the cold was in everything. From the bracing. He had set his teeth the way a man sets them before the bone setter pulls, and the muscle stood out along the hinge of his jaw. And he watched her bleeding hand come down to the first knot, and he made himself keep his eyes open. "When it starts," Mara said, "do not fight to stay a man. Fight to stay yourself. They are not the same thing today. Begin." She freed the first knot. The violet light came up out of the stone and ran into him along the cord, and the cord burned away behind it, ash on the wind, and where the light entered his chest, it became a chain, a real one. looped twice around his collarbone and once down across the breastbone, links of cold fire as thick as her wrist, dragging at him, and he went forward onto his hands over the stone with the weight of it. Mara found the second knot through the smoke and the blood and the shaking of her own hand and freed it. The chain pulled tight, and another grew beside it, and the thing behind his ribs that had turned over so slowly all these days came fully awake and threw itself at the inside of him. His back arched. A sound came out of him, low and wrong. The white streak over his temple was joined by a second and a third as she worked, with the black going out of his hair in lines, the way frost takes a leaf. "Stay," she told him. "Radu, stay with the part that knows my name." She freed the fourth knot and the fifth. The chains multiplied across him, Violet slamming him down onto his knees on the broken stone exactly as it had begun, exactly as the cut had shown and then refused to show. And now there was no cutting away from it. His ribs began to spread. She heard them go, the wet popping along both sides, green wood bent past where it wants to bend, and she did not stop, because stopping in the middle of a binding kills the body it is in. Her grandmother had tied that lesson into the cord, too. The wolf came up through his throat, blue fire and a long skull, and the shoulders of the thing folding up out of the place it had been packed into for 20 years, were his voice and its voice on the same torn breath, and Mara was on her knees in the rubble with the last third of the cord in her bleeding fist and the smoke stinging her eyes. And she did the thing the cut had ended on. She closed her hands around the knots that were left, all of them, and she held. She did not let go. The thread did not snap. She had thought it would. She held it through the worst of it, through the column of cold fire pouring up out of him, and the chains screaming as they came apart, link by link. And she kept her ruined hand pressed flat to his heaving chest, and her face close to the ruin of his face. And she said his name into it like a hand held out over water, and somewhere down inside the noise and the blue and the breaking, the part of him that knew her name took the hand. His eyes opened. They were lit from behind, cold and animal, and for a moment they did not know her, and then they did. "There," Mara breathed. "There you are." He stood up. That was what stood up. Not only the wolf, and not only the man, both of them at once sharing one frame, the beast riding just under the skin, so that when he straightened to his full height, the gray light caught a shimmer of fur that was there and then was not, and his shadow on the broken wall was a man's shadow with a long muzzle and high ears. The chains were gone. The smoke thinned off the standing stone. Radu Valkan stood in the ring over the place where he had been cut from himself, breathing in great whole breaths for the first time in his life, his hair run through with iron, and he turned his head toward the trees because he had heard the boots on the cart road a full minute before Mara did. Costin came up through the last of the trees with 8 men and a priest. He had not climbed a hill that steep in years, and it showed, his breath tearing, 2 of the men half carrying him the last of the way, but he came on, and behind him Father Angel came with a brass crucifix held up in front of him like a lantern. The men spread out at the edge of the ruin with their hands on their long knives and their bill hooks, and they looked at the thing standing in the ring with the shimmer crossing its skin, and not one of them came any closer. Costin stopped at the edge of the ring. He looked at his nephew. He looked at the heaved flags and the dark stone, which he had seen once before, on a night Radu could not remember. "Put it down," Costin said. He was not speaking to the men. "Whatever she has woken in you, lie down here and let her put it back. I will see you are fed for the rest of your life. I will give you the old hunting lodge above the falls. No one will trouble you. You will want for nothing." He held out one hand flat, the way you gentle a horse. "You do not understand what comes loose if you do this. I do. Let me help you the way I helped you before. The way you helped me." Radu's voice came out doubled, his and the other under it. "At the gate. You should thank me, boy." "Yes," Costin's hand stayed out. "And you should. I kept you alive. Voika wanted to bind you and walk away. I made her bind you, and I kept you breathing 20 years. There is no man living who would have done that for an heir who could take the seat from him. I did. Now lie down." The wolf in Radu lifted its head and tasted the air, and Radu felt it find something it wanted, and he watched his uncle's free hand drift up, the way it had drifted up at the window with the boy, and press flat against the front of his own coat, over the breastbone, over the place where every Vulcan carried a furnace. "You have no charm on you," Radu said slowly. "No man of the blood wears the iron, but you keep your hand there. You've kept it there my whole life. I thought it was a habit." He took one step in the ring, and the men flinched back. "What are you checking for, Uncle? What is it you keep reaching for? That is not there." Costin's hand froze against his chest. "You knelt at the fire, too," Radu said, and the doubled voice had gone very quiet. 40 years before me, and the wolf came to you. They all swear it. The house saw it. Did they? Or did you stand up and make a sound and let them tell each other what they wanted to have seen? Because there was no one left who remembered what the real thing looks like. He took another step. "You did not cage me to save the seat. You caged me because a true wolf in this house, taking his beast in front of everyone, would have stood next to you and shown the whole valley that the regent never had one at all." The priest's crucifix wavered. Costin's mouth opened and shut. His soldier's stillness had gone. His hand pressed harder at the front of his coat, fingers spread, gripping the cloth over the empty place. And that was the answer. That was the whole of it, written in one gesture in front of his own men. "I am the only one who ever survived it," Costin said, and his voice cracked down the middle. "Empty. When do you know what they do to an empty Vulcan? You know. You lived it. I was not going to be turned out to die in a ditch with a charm of prey round my throat, so I learned to wear the lie like a coat, and it fit. It fit for 40 years, until they got you, until there was going to be another one of the blood standing up whole in front of the house with everything I do not have. So yes, I caged you. I would do it again. Now, for the love of God, lie down." The wolf had heard enough. It had what it came up for. It had the scent of the empty thing across the ring, the one true hollow man in a valley of furnaces. And it knew that hollow because it had been packed into one for 20 years. It tore the rest of the way loose. Mara felt the last knots burn through her fingers all at once, and she let them. She had nothing left to hold, and the thing that came out of Radu came out feral and 20 years angry, and it did not lunge for the men with the billhooks. It went over the standing stone in one low pour of muscle and gray light, and it took Costin, where he stood, with his hand pressed to his empty chest. There was not much sound. A short one from Costin, cut off. The men broke and ran for the trees. All 8. Andre first, the priest last, his crucifix dropped, ringing on the flags. Snow that had been white went dark in a long fan across the ruin, and Radu went down on his knees in the middle of it, both hands fisted in his own hair, fighting the thing for the reins. Because the wolf was not finished, the wolf wanted the running men too. The wolf wanted the whole valley that had called him beast fodder. And then Mara crawled to him through the rubble on her torn hands and got her arms around the great shimmering wrongness of him from behind and put her bleeding mouth against his ear. "Radu Valkan," she said, "you are not the leash and you are not only the teeth. Come back to the part that knows my name." The wolf turned its head. Its eyes found her. And out of the tree line, drawn by the unbinding the way iron filings turn to a lodestone, the pack came. Not many. 9, 10, lean winter wolves that had no business near men, and they came in low with their ears flat, and they did not threaten. They circled wide of the dark snow and the dead lord, and they sat, all of them, in a loose ring at the edge of the broken floor, and they put their heads down, and one of them, an old gray bitch with a torn ear, and came forward alone to the edge of the ring and lay flat on her belly in front of the thing Radu had become, and waited. Something went out of him. The shimmer settled. The fur that was there and not there drew back under the skin and stayed, and his shoulders came down, and the gray-eyed man surfaced again through the animal with the old bitch lying patient in front of him, and he reached out one shaking hand and laid it on the torn ear, and the pack let out a long breath together, a low sound that came up through the soles of Mara's boots, the sound a thing makes when a door it has waited at for a very long time finally opens. 2 valleys to the east, where the river ran in a straighter line, 3 men in good wool coats were driving stakes into frozen ground. They worked off a long brass instrument on 3 legs, and they sighted through it and called numbers, and the youngest wrote the numbers in a leather book, and they drove a stake painted red at the top, and then they paced a chain's length and drove another. The rail would come through here in the spring after this one, or the one after. The line on the survey did not care whose pasture it crossed. It went where the grade was kindest. In the town below, in a dry office that smelled of ink and coal smoke, a clerk of the Imperial Land Registry worked down a list of holdings whose taxes had not been paid and whose lords could not be found. He had a good hand. He wrote each name and ruled a line through it, and wrote in the margin the word for lapsed, for reverted, for absorbed into the district. Near the bottom of the page he came to an old mountain holding a wolf house, one of the last, no heir of record, regent unreachable, dues 3 years in arrears. He wrote House Valkan. He ruled the line through it. He did not look up because there was nothing to look up at, only a name going out of a book, and the ledger had no column for wolves and never had. Radu came down off the mountain at dusk with the pack thinning into the trees, on either side of him, and Mara at his shoulder, with her hand bound in a strip of her own hem. He did not go down toward the village. The smoke off the square had thickened, and somewhere in it Father Angel was already telling the valley what he had seen, and what it meant, and the priest had got the healer's name down the mountain, to men who burned women for less than waking the old blood, or there would be no roof at the tree line to go back to. There would be no lodge above the falls. There was the high pass and the next valley, and the Empire's roads that did not know either of their faces yet. He stopped once, where the deer track crossed the old cart road, at the place a man could still turn and look back down at the whole of it. The valley lay below in the last light, the river a gray thread, the hall with its half-glassed windows where his uncle would not be coming home, the church, the small bright wound of the square. His hair was iron all through now, run gray in the space of one dawn, and his ribs would knit crooked, and the years the cage had eaten were not coming back. He was whole. He had a wolf, and it was his, and there was no right left to take it to, and no house left to show it to, and no seat left to take. Oh, he had won the thing they cut out of him. In the same season the world had decided it no longer kept ledgers for men like him. He looked at the valley for the length of one breath. Then the old bitch with the torn ear pressed her shoulder against his leg, impatient, and he turned and went up into the trees with Mara and the pack, and the snow came down behind them and began, without any hurry at all, to fill in the prints. Far below, in the dry office, the clerk blotted the page, closed the ledger, and reached up to turn down his lamp.
If your throat went tight at that, at a man getting his wolf back the very year the world stopped having any use for wolves, then you already understand why this story stays with people, and I would like to know where you are sitting while it does. Tell me in the comments which valley you are watching from tonight, your town, your country, the road outside your own window. Leave a like if Radu earned it. Send this up the trail to one person who would feel that last dawn in their chest. And if you mean to follow the rest of these old roads with me before the snow fills them in, subscribe and ring the bell so the next one reaches you the moment it moves.